Roberto Carlos, the legendary Brazilian, is not just a soccer player. He is a living symbol of speed, power, and endurance that goes far beyond the pitch. Born in Garça, São Paulo, Roberto entered the world with humble feet, but a huge ambition to rise above poverty. His career began at União São João, then quickly stood out at Palmeiras, where he helped the team win countless domestic titles, from the Campeonato Paulista to the Campeonato Brasileiro. But Roberto Carlos's name really exploded when he joined Real Madrid in 1996, where he became an indispensable part of the Galacticos and won 3 UEFA Champions League titles, 4 La Liga titles, 3 Copa del Rey titles, and countless other honors. His divine free kicks, lightning-fast overlapping runs, and all-around defensive and attacking abilities turned him into a living monument of soccer. Roberto Carlos was also a pillar of the Brazil national team, winning the World Cup 2002 with Seleção, the Copa América 1997, and the Confederations Cup in 1997 and 2005. Individually, he received countless awards: the Ballon d'Argent, the FIFA World Cup Dream Team, the FIFA Pro World Event, and was honored by IFFHS as one of the greatest fullbacks in the world. Every title, every goal, every assist is proof of his dedication, his extraordinary effort, and his desire to push beyond every limit. Roberto is not just a player. He is a cultural icon, a role model for millions of young people in Brazil and around the world. A living proof that poverty is not destiny, and that talent combined with unwavering will can reach any height. But behind those glittering titles is a life full of challenges, silent pains, and an extraordinary will to overcome them. Roberto Carlos had to fight not only against opponents on the field, but also against his own fear of losing himself, against the tremendous pressure from the expectations of the nation, the club, and millions of fans. The years growing up in poverty, struggling from a young age, and witnessing his parents' hard labor forged in him an extraordinary endurance. Every time he fell, every time he was injured or doubted, Roberto stood up again, reminding himself of everything he had already overcome. The ambition was not just to win, but to live, to prove that pain does not destroy, but forges a person. His perseverance, discipline, and determination became an inspiration for teammates and generations of young players, proving that behind the glory there are always painful moments, silent drops of sweat, and a heart that never gives up. Roberto Carlos did not just score goals, he left a mark of an indomitable spirit, a story of the triumph of will over adversity. If Roberto Carlos's story has inspired you, please hit the subscribe button so you do not miss his journey, full of tragedy, but also extraordinary. Roberto Carlos was born in a small village in Garça, São Paulo, where poverty was not only a challenge but also destiny. And from a very young age, he witnessed the hardships his parents had to endure. His father worked tirelessly in textile factories. His mother worked all day in the fields and in the kitchen, both exhausting themselves just to feed the family and keep their children from going hungry. The cramped house with a rickety tin roof, 4 walls where the wind blew everywhere, sunlight pouring in during summer and rain pouring in during the rainy season, was the place that nurtured a boy who early realized that his existence was not guaranteed and no one cared. Roberto, with his small feet and still tender hands, from the age of 6 or 7 had to work, picking cotton seeds in the fields, helping his mother take care of his younger siblings, sometimes skipping meals so others could have enough. Every day, he faced the scorching heat that burned his skin, a sore back, blistered hands from work, and in his mind there was always a silent fear that if he fell, no one would pick him up. Real education for Roberto almost did not exist. School was only rudimentary classes, teachers did not care, peers often avoided or mocked him, and the rare books he had were a luxury that had to be shared with siblings. Each passing day was a battle for survival, And it was in that emptiness and loneliness that Roberto learned to be independent, to trust his own feet and will, to find joy on his own, to find hope on his own, to create his own playgrounds from dirt and homemade balls, to escape the harsh reality. Those empty spaces were not only physical but also mental. No one believed in him. No one guided him, and this very loneliness forged in him an extraordinary endurance, but also left silent scars that only the boy himself knew and felt. Long nights, when everyone had fallen asleep, Roberto sat with old pieces of paper or with a stick turned into a ball, dreaming of a world where he would be recognized, where talent and effort would not be forgotten. The lack of love, the lack of guidance, and the indifferent eyes of the world around turned him into a faint shadow passing through life, existing but not seen, heard, or acknowledged. But it was from being forgotten that Roberto learned to stand up and keep going, learned to trust himself, learned to turn pain into strength, and learned to turn darkness into motivation to exist and rise above. People might say Roberto was an ordinary boy, but for him everything was a fight. From hunger, from the calluses on his hands, from the mockery and contempt, every step, every kick of the ball on the rough fields, every hour of labor from early morning until late at night was a lesson in endurance, in patience, and in the belief that even if the world did not recognize him, there was still a way out of the darkness. From physical hunger to mental emptiness, Roberto Carlos's childhood was a chain of cruel challenges, but also the starting point for his indomitable spirit, where he learned to nurture his dream, to nurture his will, so that one day these feet would take him out of poverty, out of invisibility, and make the world witness the talent that a once forgotten boy carried within him. In that loneliness and silence, Roberto learned to persevere, learned to turn pain into strength, learned to take each step even if no one saw it, no one believed in it, and learned to turn poverty into leverage for himself. It was those days, those silent wounds that shaped a resilient spirit, an unconquerable heart, and an iron will that later would make Roberto Carlos not only a legend on the pitch, but also a symbol for those who have been forgotten, underestimated, and had to fight alone to exist. Roberto Carlos did not play soccer just out of passion or the dream of becoming a star, but because soccer was the only way for him to escape the harsh reality and the extreme poverty that had clung to him since childhood. From the very first days, when his feet were not yet strong, he had to walk for hours to reach empty dirt fields, where other children played just for fun, while for him, every run, every kick carried the fear of hunger and the desire to escape the dead-end life. The homemade balls made from rags, the matches under the scorching sun and pouring rain all became the first training sessions, where he learned patience, perseverance, and endurance that few children could understand. Every run, every dribble was not just physical training but also a lesson in survival. Every inaccurate shot was a lesson not to give up, to search for a moment that could change his fate. The boy Roberto understood that if he did not use soccer as an escape, this life would swallow him whole. If he did not try, he would forever sink into poverty, into the empty nights under the flickering light of the rickety roof, where the sounds of insects and wind blowing through the walls were the only companions. Every match was a battle for survival, and he learned to see failure not as an end, but as a necessary step to stay alive. On those dirt fields, Roberto Carlos learned to react quickly, to feel the rhythm of the ball, to read opponents and use every available resource. All these skills not only served the pitch, but also became the baggage to survive in harsh daily life. Hunger was the first coach, teaching him that if he did not run, did not try, did not fight, he would have no other chance. Every hunger pang, every day passing without a full meal, was a reminder that he had to rise up, had to find a way to live and assert his existence. Soccer became the means, but it was poverty and deprivation that forced Roberto to learn how to be resilient, how to fight against injustice and darkness around him. In the rare moments when he stood on the field, the ball at his feet, sweat dripping down his forehead, Roberto did not just play to score, but played to survive, played to prove that he would not be broken by destiny, played to find an escape from the life full of deprivation that he could not control. The saying that Roberto Carlos once whispered to himself back then still echoes like an unchanging truth. Football didn't save me. Hunger forced me into it. Soccer was not salvation, but the only bridge for him to escape a life that any child would fear: hunger, lack of education, being forgotten and lost among adults busy with worries about food and clothing. Every run on the field, every shot, every dribble contained an entire harsh childhood, contained fear but also full of will. Every time he threw himself into the match, giving his all, it was a challenge to poverty, to abandonment, to the barriers that society placed. Thanks to those life-or-death lessons, Roberto gradually formed an unshakable perseverance and determination, which became the foundation so that later, when he stepped onto the international stage, he became the greatest left-back in soccer history, bringing superior strength, speed, and technique that amazed the whole world. And from those days, Roberto learned that hunger not only nourished the body, but also trained the soul, creating a person who never surrendered, who always knew how to stand up, who always knew how to fight, and had never accepted being lost in the darkness of poverty and invisibility. Thanks to those moments of struggle with poverty, Roberto Carlos turned pain into motivation, turned injustice into a stepping stone for a glorious career, and learned to turn the soccer field not just into a place to play, but into a place to assert his existence and spiritual strength, a place where he was heard, seen, and recognized. Even though the outside world had never given him attention or faith, Roberto Carlos grew up in an environment where the body was the only asset, where every muscle, every pair of legs and hands had to be built through grueling labor, enduring scorching sun, pouring rain, and long days dragging on cotton fields or in the factories where his parents worked tirelessly. His physique was not formed from professional training classes or meticulous soccer coaches, but was forged day by day through heavy labor, through every run, every cotton picking, every time carrying rice sacks or pulling heavy water barrels. Every movement was a lesson in endurance. Every step was a way to train stamina, speed, and flexibility skills that later would become the foundation for a soccer legend. There was no coach standing beside him teaching him how to run, how to dribble, or how to shoot. He learned everything from reality, from the pressure of life, from hunger, and from the desire not to return to poverty, where any mistake could lead to hunger, failure, and being forgotten. It was the harshness of the circumstances that forged Roberto into an extraordinary body. Strong thighs, agile legs, sharp reflexes, and superior stamina all formed from non-stop labor, from days when the body was exhausted almost to the breaking point. But the spirit still had to stand firm. That body became the only asset he had, the means of survival and the only tool to escape poverty and create a different path in life. If he lost his health, lost his agile legs, or the stamina he had trained, everything would disappear. Not only his future career, but also the chance to survive the cruel circumstances of his childhood. That is why Roberto learned to take care of and exploit every bit of strength available in his body, but at the same time lived in a silent fear that an injury, a mistake, or a weakness would make him lose everything. Every training session on the dirt field, every time dribbling through stones or rough grass, every long shot was training not only in skills, but also in the ability to survive. The way he turned his body into a weapon, turned physical strength into the hope of survival. There were no textbooks, no specialized training. Everything was learned from life and from the limitations of his own body, learning to exploit strengths, compensate for weaknesses, and always stand up after every stumble. These days were also linked to psychological challenges. The body was a tool for making a living, but at the same time, a source of fear, Because if he was no longer agile or strong, every opportunity to escape poverty would be destroyed. Every pain, every bruise, every slip on the dirt field or scratch on his hands was a reminder that the body had to be preserved and exploited to the maximum. Losing this strength also meant being trapped in poverty, losing control of life, and the risk of returning to where he once walked with weak feet. That is why Roberto Carlos learned to turn every part of his physical strength into a shield against fate, turn it into the only ally he could trust, and at the same time turn it into the foundation to build the runs, the shots, and the dribbles that later the whole world would have to admire. In those forging years, loneliness and pressure still constantly surrounded him, but Roberto learned that as long as his body was still agile enough, had enough stamina, was strong enough, he still had the chance to save himself, to create a different future from the dark days. It was the harshness of the circumstances and the awareness that the body was the only asset that forged an indomitable spirit, a will that never surrendered, and a heart that dared to dream big, dared to reach the top without needing anyone to believe in or guide him. The boy who was once forgotten in poverty knew that every opportunity, every future success was tied to the feat and physical strength he had created. And it was that body, trained from labor, that would take Roberto Carlos from the dirt fields in Garza to the magnificent stadiums of Real Madrid, to the brilliant World Cup matches under the lights, and turn him from an invisible boy into a soccer legend admired by the whole world. It was the body, and the unwavering will to protect it, that was the foundation for Roberto Carlos, not only to exist, but also to become a living monument, a proof that even with a low starting point, the strength and perseverance of body and spirit can change destiny. Roberto Carlos, after those years of hard training to turn his body into the only asset, finally stepped out of Brazil's borders, carrying the hope of escaping the shadow of poverty and seeking opportunities in Europe, where famous clubs across the continent were hunting for promising young talents. When he arrived at Inter Milan in the mid-1990s, everyone expected that this would be the turning point to help him affirm his name on the world soccer stage. But reality was completely different. Right from the first training sessions, Roberto realized that the professional European environment was not simply a challenge of physical strength or technique, it was also a battle for understanding and how coaches perceived talent. He, with his unique playing style, superior speed, and powerful shots, was not used properly. The left-back position that he mastered on the Palmeiras pitch and with the Brazil national team was put into a limited framework, making him unable to fully demonstrate the attacking and creative abilities he possessed. The feeling of being misunderstood and not being valued correctly was a big shock for Roberto. He had spent his entire childhood proving himself, training every muscle, every run, every shot. And now, when the European opportunity seemed to open up, he was placed in a limited role, making his efforts and desires seem ignored. Every overlapping run, every dribble, every powerful long shot felt cut short, turned into useless efforts, while teammates and coaches did not understand how to exploit his unique talent. The first matches at Inter Milan were not victories, but valuable lessons about the harshness of European soccer, about how the world is not always ready to recognize the value of those who are different, and that sometimes superior talent can still be forgotten if not placed in the right position and suitable environment. Roberto Carlos clearly felt the loneliness in his career at that time. The feeling that everything he had built from his poor childhood, from sweat and tears on the dirt fields, was at risk of vanishing because of misunderstanding and lack of trust. Every day going to training, he had to fight pressure not only from opponents, but also from prejudices, from the strictness of the coach, and from the scrutinizing eyes of teammates, people who had never really seen the extraordinary potential in every run and shot of his. The feeling of being underestimated not only hurt his spirit, but also threatened the resilient will he had built throughout his childhood and years of hard labor. The time at Inter Milan, although short, was an important psychological and professional challenge. Roberto almost sank into anonymity, lost among a squad where his abilities were not recognized at the right level. He had almost disappeared from the radar of the soccer world. Those lightning-fast dribbles, those powerful shots that once amazed all of Brazil and Europe, now only evaluated as useless efforts. The worst thing appeared in his mind. He almost disappeared before the world ever knew his name. This feeling was like a haunting ghost, reminding him that talent and effort alone were not enough if the environment was not ready to recognize and evaluate correctly. But it was precisely in that seemingly lost and misunderstood period that Roberto Carlos learned vital lessons about patience, will, and how to keep faith in himself. Every day, when he went out on the field and was limited in his role, he reminded himself that true value did not depend on the eyes or comments of others, but came from his own strength, speed, skills, and desire to overcome circumstances. The difficult time at Inter Milan became a harder shell for his spirit, helping Roberto prepare for the next big turning point in his career, when the real opportunity to shine appeared at Real Madrid. And it was that experience of being misunderstood, being underestimated, though painful, that trained him with extraordinary endurance, turning Roberto Carlos into a player who was not only strong physically, but also resilient mentally, ready to wait for the moment when the world would have to recognize his extraordinary talent. Roberto Carlos, after the difficult period full of misunderstanding at Inter Milan, finally found his destined home at Real Madrid, where it not only brought him the opportunity to shine, but also placed him under unprecedented pressure in his career. Right from the moment he signed the contract to join Los Blancos in 1996, he felt that this would be the turning point, where the silent efforts over many years would finally be recognized and valued. The first matches on the Bernabeu pitch witnessed the explosion of a left-back that the whole world had never seen. Superior speed, unstoppable overlapping runs, powerful long shots that bent physics and stunned both opponents and spectators. Every goal, every assist, every all-around attacking and defending move turned Roberto into a living symbol of Real Madrid, becoming an indispensable part of the Galacticos. Alongside stars like Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldo, David Beckham, and Luis Figo, success came quickly and overwhelmingly, from La Liga titles, Copa del Rey titles, to UEFA Champions League titles, all proving one clear thing. Roberto Carlos was not just a player, he was the embodiment of Brazilian speed, technique, and power on European soil. However, along with the brilliant spotlight came the enormous pressure that Roberto had never faced before. No longer were there limited matches or misunderstandings. Now he had to maintain the peak in an environment where every detail was scrutinized, every move had to be perfect, every match was a test for body and mind. Because if he slowed down, if he missed a beat, it would not just be a conceded goal or a missed opportunity, but also harsh judgment from the media, from the coach, and from himself. Roberto realized that at Real Madrid he was not allowed to be weak. Every shot, every overlapping run had to be optimized. Every wrong move was a reminder that the peak waits for no one. And legends could also be forgotten if they did not maintain their form. That pressure came not only from outside the field, but also from within the mind, where the boy who was once forgotten and the feeling of being misunderstood still haunted him, reminding him that if he did not achieve it, he would sink back into darkness, disappear again like the time he almost was forgotten at Inter Milan. Every training session, every match was a battle with himself, with a body tired from age and accumulated injuries, with the tremendous pressure to always be resilient and shine. Roberto learned that success was no longer enjoyment, but a burden, no longer joy, but responsibility, no longer a challenge, but an obligation to exist at the peak. If he slowed down even one beat, he knew he would be overtaken, forgotten, criticized. Every run, every shot now was a delicate balance between physical strength, tactics, and resilient spirit. Every mistake was exposed in front of millions of spectators in the whole world. That pressure created a profound, tragic side in Roberto Carlos's career. Even though he stood at the peak, he never felt safe or allowed to relax. Every moment on the field was an examination. Every goal was proof that he still had the ability, but also a reminder that the peak is never a stopping point, but a place where every mistake is exposed and every success must be defended, not allowed to be weak, not allowed to slow down, not allowed to let opponents pass. All these demands made Roberto Carlos live in a state of constant tension, a pressure that only legends understand. However, it was precisely in this period that tragedy also became the catalyst for Roberto Carlos to develop his talent to a superior level. He turned pressure into motivation, turned physical limits into strengths, learned to maintain speed, fitness, and long-shot ability to perfection, while training his mind to face the strict eyes of the global audience. Moments that seemed like losses or failures, a missed shot, an inaccurate defensive move, a regrettable defeat, were all used by him to learn, to perfect himself, and to prove that physical strength and unwavering will could overcome any pressure. In those challenging days at Real Madrid, Roberto Carlos learned that to become a true legend, one must accept that glory always comes with an invisible burden, that the peak is a game that does not allow mistakes and every step must be precise. But it was that very pressure that forged Roberto into an unforgettable icon, the greatest left back in history, the one who brought Brazilian speed, power, technique, and indomitable spirit to the whole world. Every goal, every assist, every divine long shot is proof of extraordinary perseverance, of the will to survive that overcame poverty, challenges, and even seemingly insurmountable limits. And it was from the Bernabeu that Roberto Carlos stepped into the minds and hearts of millions, not just as a player, but as a legend born from hardship, forged by pressure, and etched by the moves and shots that amazed the world, proving that even when forced to maintain the peak non-stop, a person can still shine brightly and turn pressure into glory. Roberto Carlos, after the years of training his body, overcoming misunderstandings and tremendous pressure at Real Madrid, finally had the moment when the world began to truly know his name. The divine free kick into the French national team's net in 1997. This moment, remembered by the whole world as one of the greatest goals in soccer history, was not only proof of the extraordinary technique, power, and precision that Roberto had trained throughout his childhood and adulthood, but also the expression of an entire life fighting against poverty, loneliness, and the fear of being forgotten. When the ball flew in that strange curving trajectory, passing the wall and the goalkeeper, millions of people around the world held their breath. But for Roberto, it was not a moment of freedom or simple personal victory, but a scream from the depths of his childhood, a desire to be seen and recognized, a temporary release after many years of being forgotten and misunderstood. For many years before that, the boy from Garza had to endure being abandoned, deprived, hungry, and having to labor hard to survive, learning to stand firm with his own feet and physical strength without any guidance or encouragement. Every run on the dirt field, every shot from homemade balls or matches without spectators was a testament to the will to survive. And the 1997 shot was the crystallization of all those lessons, a scream that the world finally heard, but still spoken from the pain and desire that had been suppressed from the years when the boy Roberto had to fight to stay alive. That moment was not simply a goal or technique. It carried his entire childhood, all the sleepless nights under the rickety roof, the exhausting days picking cotton or laboring to help the family, the times of being mocked, forgotten, underestimated, and misunderstood. The ball flew like a release, but at the same time, it was a reminder that everything Roberto had today was thanks to the resilience and endurance trained through the years. Every long shot was a combination of extraordinary physique and steel spirit, the place where technique met pain, where speed and power met memories of a childhood that was unseen, unheard, and unrecognized. Fans around the world only saw a miraculous goal. But Roberto knew that every previous run, every previous shot was part of the survival journey. The body trained from grueling labor, the mind resilient under infinite pressure, and the spirit always tested by poverty and loneliness. No one saw that the ball in that moment was the embodiment of childhood, the scream from a boy who was once forgotten, who once fought to survive and seek recognition in a world where his presence was almost never noticed. That goal became the symbol of Roberto Carlos, a moment the whole world remembers, but also proof of the inner strength and survival will that took him to the peak. It showed that every technique, every speed, every long shot was not just innate ability or professional training, but also the result of a life full of challenges, a forgotten childhood, and an indomitable will that never surrendered. The 1997 shot not only made the legend on the pitch, but also was a silent declaration that Roberto Carlos, despite coming from poverty, being misunderstood and underestimated, could still compress all the pain, all the desire, and all the perseverance into one moment that made the whole world admire. This was also the moment Roberto realized that every challenge, every pressure, every loneliness and abandonment in the past not only trained his skills, but also created a person strong enough to do extraordinary things, strong enough to make his suppressed and forgotten childhood echo through every shot and become part of world soccer history. He almost disappeared before the world ever knew his name, had now become reality, but this time with the whole world witnessing the scream of a childhood that had been suppressed for many years. Roberto Carlos, after the 1997 shot that amazed the whole world, entered the period where the spotlight of the pitch truly took over his entire life. Money and fame from the goals, the assists, and the titles with Real Madrid flooded in. But all of these things, no matter how glittering they were, could not heal the deep wounds from his childhood and the years of misunderstanding at Inter Milan. Every time he stepped onto the Bernabeu pitch with tens of thousands of fans cheering, Roberto clearly felt that fame did not mean peace. His heart was still filled with fears and pressure, still had to fight, not to be overwhelmed by inner instability and the emptiness that fame could not fill. The higher he climbed to the peak, the more he was honored. The more he appeared on magazine covers, received awards, the clearer the feeling of being lost became in Roberto. He learned that the spotlight was only an outer shell, while inside, the empty spaces, the loneliness, and the emptiness still existed, silently reminding him that fame could not replace love, recognition, and belief in himself. In the training sessions, in the locker rooms filled with lights and laughter, Roberto often quietly observed, realizing that even though everyone admired and applauded him, he still could not feel completely at ease, still had moments when he had to tell himself that all this success could not soothe the lingering pain over many years. The long trips with the Brazil national team, the tense matches in the Champions League, the individual and team titles, all were proof of extraordinary talent and will. But they could not replace the emptiness in his soul, could not compensate for the days of poverty, the lonely nights, the pains of a forgotten childhood. The more famous he became, the more he became a role model. The more he had to face unimaginable expectations from the entire soccer world, from the media, from fans everywhere. Roberto felt he was both honored and placed under tremendous pressure that no one could share with him. The pressure to maintain peak form, to always run fast, shoot powerfully, defend solidly, and attack effectively became a daily burden. Roberto learned to stay alert, to keep a steel spirit. But sometimes the inner instability made him feel exhausted to the point of burnout, the feeling of being lost and lonely right in the middle of the stadium, lights, the cheers of tens of thousands of spectators, and his excellent teammates. Moments that seemed like brilliant victories sometimes became painful reminders that fame could not soothe the memories of an abandoned childhood, of the years he had to train his body and spirit alone to survive. Roberto realized that money, titles, and applause were only outer symbols, unable to touch the deepest part of the soul, where loneliness, insecurity, and the feeling of being forgotten still lingered. Every time a shot went in or a perfect assist made teammates and coaches marvel, Roberto told himself that he was doing it all for passion, but also for a deeper reason, to prove to himself that he could survive everything, that he still existed, that every pain of childhood, every misunderstanding, every small or big failure could not extinguish the fire in his heart. However, the joy from those moments always came with non-stop pressure, making him realize that the more famous he became, the more honored he was, the denser and harder to bear the feeling of being lost, and the inner emptiness became. Fame became a burden, but also a catalyst that made Roberto train his will, know how to stand firm against every storm, know how to turn loneliness and pressure into motivation to maintain form, to continue conquering peaks, and to create legendary moments on the pitch, even though money, titles, and applause never fully healed the instability. Roberto Carlos learned to live with them, to turn pressure into motivation, to turn loneliness into strength. He knew that to become a legend, one must accept that fame cannot erase memories and pain, but it can turn them into energy to rise up, to maintain the peak, and to make every shot, every overlapping run, and every moment on the field become proof of the resilient will, the perseverance, and the indomitable spirit that both his childhood and difficult life had forged in him, making Roberto Carlos not only an excellent player, but also a living symbol of spiritual strength that rises above all adversity. Roberto Carlos, when he had become a legend on the pitch, not only faced pressure from fame, achievements, and stadium lights, but also had to bear the invisible burden coming from a chaotic emotional life. Throughout his peak years, he entered many relationships, dated different women, built his own family, but most of these relationships did not last. Time, work pressure, continuous matches, along with the need to maintain peak form at Real Madrid and the Brazil national team, made Roberto unable to give the people he loved his full time and mind. The rare romantic moments, family dinners, or peaceful evenings with loved ones were all distorted by match schedules, long flights, exhausting training, and media pressure. Every new relationship brought hope, but then quickly faded, because Roberto always had to choose between love and soccer, between emotions and career, and usually soccer won. The relationships that blossomed and broke repeatedly, from youthful ones to those during the peak of his career, all left silent wounds in his heart. He witnessed painful breakups, sometimes due to misunderstandings, sometimes due to unfixable busyness, and many times Roberto himself could not explain the helplessness when seeing the person he loved leave, and he could not hold on. The children born from different relationships, though loved, could not bond fully with him, which was also proof that Roberto had to sacrifice personal emotions to maintain his career. Every time Roberto stepped onto the field, wearing the Brazil or Real Madrid jersey, he carried a part of his youth, a part of love, a part of family in his mind, but could not bring it all onto the pitch, and that left a big emptiness in his life. The tragedy was not only the loneliness in his personal life, but also the feeling of failure in maintaining lasting relationships. Roberto Carlos, who had devoted his entire youth and energy to training his body, learning to survive poverty, and fighting on European pitches, realized that those efforts had taken away most of the time and energy he could have given to love and family. He gradually realized that even though he could conquer tournaments, score historic goals, and become a living legend, in his private life, he was still a man who was often missed, misunderstood, and unable to keep his loved ones by his side. This distance not only caused pain in private moments, but also accumulated over time, creating a persistent feeling of loss, like a loneliness that accompanied every title and victory. Every broken relationship, every fragmented family, was a reminder of the price of sacrifice in his career. Roberto Carlos understood that he had given all his best years to soccer, to the pitch, to fame and greatness, But in return, personal love, family stability, and lasting relationships were left unresolved. He had to learn to accept that a part of his personal life would forever be incomplete, that loved ones might not stay with him long enough, and that the sacrifice for passion and professional responsibility was unavoidable. But it was those losses that trained him to become a stronger person, someone who knew how to cherish moments with loved ones, even if brief, and who knew how to transform personal pain into strength to compete on the pitch. He gave his best years to football and had nothing left for love. Roberto Carlos, with his sacrifice and unwavering will, built a glorious career, conquered peaks that few could imagine. But at the same time, every goal, every overlapping run, and every title was paid for with loneliness, unfinished relationships, and a deep emptiness in his heart that soccer could not fill. And it was those empty spaces, those silent pains, that turned Roberto Carlos into a person who was not only extraordinary in physique, technique, and speed, but also extraordinary in his ability to endure, to be resilient, and to keep standing firm against every challenge, despite the losses and loneliness that personal life brought. Roberto Carlos, after the years of dedicating his entire youth and energy to soccer, entered a complicated personal phase where the role of a father became a challenge no less intense than the matches at Real Madrid or the Brazil national team. He had many children from different relationships, each child the result of emotional but short-lived romances, yet all of them had to live with one reality. Roberto could not be fully present in their lives. The packed match schedule, long flights, the pressure to maintain peak form, and international events had taken all of his time, making caring for, nurturing, and bonding with his children a challenge that seemed impossible to overcome. Even though he loved each child and always wanted to be there and accompany them, Roberto knew that limited time and circumstances made it impossible for him to give them the complete fatherly love that any child deserved. The fragmented life forced Roberto to share his affection and responsibility in scattered ways. There were weeks when he could appear beside his children, join soccer training sessions, teach life skills, or simply tell stories of his Brazilian childhood so they could understand their roots. But most of the time he had to be away. Those distances, though unwanted, still existed as an inevitable part of the legend's life. He knew that his absence could cause loneliness and emotional deprivation in his children's hearts, but he also understood that if he gave up his career or stopped playing, he would lose everything he had sacrificed to build an extraordinary career and secure a better future for the family. This was the tragedy he had to live with every day. Loving, but not enough, being responsible but not fully, caught between pressure and sacrifice, between the titles on the pitch and the young faces he longed to be close to, but could not completely reach. Every time Roberto returned home after a tense match, sometimes only leaving gifts or making short phone calls to his children, it was a reminder of the limits life had placed on him. He watched his children grow through photos, through stories told by relatives or partners, and in his heart there was always a feeling of both happiness and regret. He taught them by his own example, resilience, perseverance, and never giving up. Yet he still ached, because he could not give them all the presents that a perfect father could offer. Roberto learned to balance between love and responsibility, between career and family, between the bright lights of the pitch and the darkness in the empty spaces that fame and success could not fill. Even though he could not be fully present, Roberto Carlos's love and responsibility still showed through every decision, every small effort, from following his children's progress in studies and sports to ensuring they received education, insurance, and better living conditions, even though he himself had to sacrifice most of his personal time and rest. This sacrifice, though silent, revealed another side of the legend's life. Beside the image of speed, power, and extraordinary shots on the pitch, he was also a father with a heart full of worry and love, but limited by the reality of life. He gave his best years to football and had nothing left for love. Roberto Carlos had given his best years to the pitch, to titles, to his career, and in return, his family life became fragmented. He always had to live with his own loneliness, even in the midst of love, having to love but not enough, having responsibility but not being able to fulfill it completely. Nevertheless, it was precisely these pains, these limits, and these sacrifices that shaped a complete person in will and spirit. Someone capable of enduring pressure, knowing how to overcome challenges, not only on the pitch, but also in life, and at the same time turning loneliness into strength to continue conquering the next peaks. Roberto Carlos, with his perseverance and will, proved that even when he could not be perfect in love or as a father, he was still a living symbol of the ability to overcome adversity, turning pain into motivation and creating a glorious career that the whole world had to admire. Roberto Carlos, after the years of rising from poverty, building his body and spirit like a weapon for survival, entered the 2006 World Cup with all the experience, skills, and will of a soccer legend. All eyes were on him. All expectations were placed on the feat that had conquered Europe, that had thrilled Brazilian fans in Real Madrid. But in what seemed like an ordinary moment, everything suddenly shook. One play, one small decision, one moment of lost focus broke the perfect image that Roberto Carlos had built over so many years. The overlapping runs, the explosive sprints, the divine long shots could not erase the moment that the entire soccer world looked at and remembered, not for his talent, but for a mistake in the most important match of his career. The heavy feeling hit like a storm. Roberto felt every judging eye, every comment from the international media, every sigh and disappointment from teammates and coaches. That moment, though only a few seconds, became a milestone in World Cup history and in the minds of millions of fans, proving that even legends are not immune to failure. Roberto understood that all the years of labor, all the brilliant goals, all the titles and fame could be overshadowed by just one careless moment, that a single mistake had enough weight to change the way the world saw him. In the glaring light of the stadium, he felt the loneliness and compressed pressure, the fear that his entire career would be defined by that minute rather than the long journey he had conquered. But Roberto Carlos did not let that moment destroy him. He realized that this was also an inevitable part of life, a lesson about the fragility of fame, about how every success comes with risk and mistakes. Every legend has a moment they are remembered for. And Roberto knew that it was the way he faced failure that truly defined his character. Not slipping into guilt or self-blame, he took it as motivation to keep training, to come back stronger, to prove that true value lies not only in perfect plays, but also in the ability to stand up after every fall. In the days after the match, Roberto had to face the media, the fans, and himself. Every question, every comment reminded him of the mistake. But at the same time, he learned to control his emotions, learned to see failure as an inevitable part of the long and harsh journey of a top player. He knew that no one is perfect, and sometimes the moment of failure makes a person more relatable, real, and emotional to the fans, because they see that even a legend can stumble and has to get back up. That moment also reminded Roberto of the value of will, of the inner strength he had built from the days of poverty, abandonment, misunderstanding, and being underestimated. Without that mental strength, the moment of mistake could have destroyed everything. But thanks to his persistent will, Roberto turned the pain and shame into a lesson, into motivation, continuing to shine in the following matches, continuing to score, assist, and contribute to the Brazil national team as well as Real Madrid. Even legends are remembered for the moment they failed. But what defines it is not the moment of failure, but the way he stood up, the way he continued to fight, and the way he used his shots, his sprints, and his assists to affirm that true value lies in the entire journey, not just in a single moment. Roberto Carlos understood that small failures, moments of mistake, do not erase the years he had sacrificed, struggled, and overcome adversity. They only highlighted more the extraordinary way he overcame everything, from a forgotten childhood, from the harsh years of labor, from misunderstandings and being underestimated, to the enormous pressure at Real Madrid to become a legend recognized by the whole world. And it was precisely the ability to stand firm in the worst moment, the ability to turn failure into motivation to continue, that created the real greatness of Roberto Carlos, making him not only an excellent player, but also a symbol of the power of will and indomitable spirit that the world will always remember. Roberto Carlos, after more than a decade conquering the peaks of world soccer, began to feel the inevitable changes in his body. Age and the years of constant fighting on the pitch had left deep marks. The legs that once overlapped the flank with terrifying speed were no longer as fluid as before. The strong thighs seemed to lose the power that had become his trademark, and the flexible muscles now needed more time to recover after every tense match. What hurt Roberto the most was not temporary fatigue or normal injuries, but the feeling that the very thing that had saved him, the very thing that had turned him from a poor boy into a legend on the pitch, was now beginning to betray him. Every run, every shot, every dribble became heavier, and the awareness that his body was no longer perfect as before forced him to face a deep disappointment, no longer being himself, no longer being the perfect version that had once made all of Europe admire him. On the Bernabeu pitch or in the Brazil jersey, Roberto Carlos had once been the symbol of speed, power, and endurance. He had once been able to race down the entire left flank, shoot free kicks that could shake the goalposts, control the rhythm of the match, and make a difference in every moment. But when age began to hit, those moments became rarer, and the fear of losing himself began to appear. Every time he stepped onto the field, Roberto felt his heart beat faster, not only because of the match, but also because of the fear that he would no longer be able to meet expectations, that the fans, teammates, and he himself would have to witness limits that had never existed before. This feeling forced him to adjust his playing style, limit explosive runs, and slow down at moments when speed had once been his most powerful weapon. The tragedy lay in the fact that the very things that had taken him to the peak strength, speed, and extraordinary physical ability now became reminders that time waits for no one. Roberto had to learn to live with the reality that his body, once an ally, had now become an obstacle. He began to experience matches with shortness of breath, no longer as agile as before, long shots that were no longer absolutely accurate, and overlapping runs that no longer made opponents wary. For a player who had once used his body as a survival tool, this decline was not only a physical challenge, but also a heavy psychological shock, forcing Roberto to face the feeling of losing the most important part of his identity. In the final training sessions and matches, Roberto Carlos learned to adapt, to train more on accuracy, tactics, and to use his long experience to compensate for the lost speed. However, the pain of realizing that the very thing that had saved him, the very thing that had built his brand and greatness, was now betraying him still lingered. The shots, the dribbles, the decisive moments on the field all evoked memories of the golden era when he was the strong and unstoppable version of himself, leaving him both nostalgic and aching. The feeling of losing control, of losing the strength that had once been his life-saving treasure, made Roberto go through moments of anxiety, questioning himself and reminding himself that even if age took away his physical strength, the resilient spirit and iron will must continue to exist. Outside the pitch, the challenges of age also came with media pressure and fan expectations, forcing Roberto Carlos to face not only his declining body, but also his image in everyone's eyes. Every small mistake, slow play, or missed beat was scrutinized and compared to his legendary version in the past. He clearly felt the difference. The fans still loved and cherished him, but he himself knew that what had once made him invincible had now become fragile and vulnerable. This moment taught him an important lesson. Greatness is not only about skill or physical strength, but also about accepting limits and maintaining an indomitable spirit, even when the body begins to betray. Age had clearly shown itself in every slowed run, every shot that was no longer absolutely accurate, even though the body was no longer perfect. Even though it had taken away his speed and power, Roberto Carlos was still a legend. He was no longer the perfect version that had once amazed the world, but the very way he stood firm against the changes in his body, the way he turned the experience of losing speed and strength into resilience, still made him a living symbol of will, indomitable spirit, and courage. Even though the thing that had once saved him was now beginning to betray him, Roberto still stepped onto the field, continued to fight, continued to leave his mark, continued to inspire generations of young players and fans around the world. Every moment on the pitch, even if no longer absolutely perfect, was still proof of the determined spirit and will that never surrendered. Forged by his childhood, the years of grueling labor, and the tragedies that had shaped him throughout his life, Roberto Carlos, after many years conquering the peaks of world soccer, finally entered the post-retirement phase, where the stadium lights, the passionate cheers, and the media attention gradually withdrew, leaving a big emptiness in his life. After leaving Real Madrid and the Brazil national team, Roberto still continued to play short-term for some other clubs, but there was no longer the excitement or drive like in the golden days. All the looks and cheers were now directed toward young players, new talents, and new idols. For someone who had once lived in the spotlight, who had once been the center of every match, who had once been the symbol of extraordinary speed, power, and technique, the feeling of being left behind as fans, media, and the soccer world moved forward was a painful experience. Day after day, Roberto Carlos realized that the world did not wait for him, that the titles, the legendary goals, and the lightning-fast dribbles now only existed in the memories of fans. While spectators and the media turned their attention to new stars, he had to learn to exist without the spotlight shining on him. Every time he opened the newspaper or scrolled online, he saw his name appearing less. The highlighted matches now belonged to the new generation of players, and the moments that had once made history were now only images replayed in news clips or old videos. The feeling of being lost and lonely crept in, forcing Roberto to face a reality he had never thought about when he was still overlapping at full speed and shooting long free kicks that made the whole world hold its breath. The world continued, while he was left behind. However, Roberto Carlos did not completely let himself sink into loneliness. He began to look for other ways to stay connected to soccer, to the fans, and to himself. He participated in some coaching activities and served as an ambassador for clubs and soccer organizations, passing on his experience and skills to the young generation of players, while sharing about the process of overcoming adversity from his poor childhood, the years of misunderstanding at Inter Milan, to the enormous pressure and perseverance at Real Madrid. Every training session, every coaching session was an opportunity for him to look back on his career, to feel that his value lay not only in the goals or titles, but also in the way he inspired and taught others how to overcome challenges. In the early days after retirement, Roberto went through many long sleepless nights, remembering the moments on the pitch, the fast overlapping runs, the goals, and the feeling of being admired by the whole world. He realized that even though the peak years had passed, his value and influence still remained intact in the hearts of fans and in soccer history. Alongside the feeling of loss and being lost was a quiet determination. Roberto had to find a way to keep living, to find new meaning for life off the pitch, where he was no longer the center of every eye, but could still leave his mark. The emptiness left by the spotlight was filled by Roberto through participating in charity programs, supporting children in difficult circumstances, boys and girls who loved soccer but had not had the opportunity to develop. He realized that the experience of poverty and the challenges he had gone through had now become valuable lessons to share. to become a source of motivation and a living role model for those who are struggling in the darkness. The feeling of giving, of teaching, and of watching young talents grow helped Roberto Carlos feel that he still had value, still had purpose, even without the stadium lights and matches filled with passionate crowds. Even though the world continued and new stars shone, Roberto still found a way to turn loneliness and emptiness into new strength. He learned to live with memories, learned to cherish every moment with family and those who loved him, learned to give without expecting anything in return. And in the quiet moments when there was no longer pressure and cheers, Roberto looked back on his life journey, realizing that the losses, the years of loneliness, the pressures and challenges had forged him into an extraordinary person, not only on the pitch, but also in his soul, teaching him how to exist and find meaning even when the world no longer surrounded him. Even though the world continued to move and attention gradually turned to new stars, Roberto Carlos, with his strength, wisdom, and resilient spirit, still held his place in soccer history and in the hearts of millions, proving that even when the spotlight withdrew, true value lies in the way he lived, loved, gave, and inspired. Despite the emptiness and loneliness that age and time had left behind, Roberto Carlos, after many decades living with soccer, stadium lights, and the admiration of millions of fans, finally entered the years where the noise and excitement no longer took over his entire life. When looking back on his life, he saw the victories, the great goals, the glittering titles, and countless moments that made the whole world marvel. But alongside them were deep empty spaces that no money or fame could fill. In Roberto's memories, the days of his poor childhood still remained etched, where he had to endure loneliness, hunger, misunderstanding, and being forgotten. And all those experiences had formed his extraordinary will, skills, and speed. But it also left scars that could not be erased. Family was the place where Roberto always saw his own limits. Even though he had many children and gave sincere love to each of them, he knew that time and professional responsibilities had made him unable to be fully present. The breakups, the unfinished relationships, the long trips, and the pressure of playing had made his emotions and closeness with family fragmented. He loved, but not enough, had responsibility, but could not fulfill it completely, and that was one of the biggest empty spaces he had to live with. Every time he watched his children grow up from afar, every time he heard stories told about moments he could not attend, Roberto clearly felt the emptiness. But at the same time, he also learned to accept that not everything in life could be perfect. Roberto Carlos, besides his family, also looked back at his own mistakes, the decisions in his personal life, the moments he had missed, the stumbles in his relationships, the times he had been too focused on his career and forgotten the important emotional values. Every mistake, every imperfect choice left a mark in his mind. But they were also valuable lessons. Those pains, those errors, those losses did not make Roberto collapse. Instead, they helped him clearly understand the true value of time, of affection, and of what is truly important in life. He did not completely regret, because he knew that everything he had gone through had created the person the whole world knows, a legend on the pitch and a symbol of extraordinary will. But there were still empty spaces that could not be filled, parts of life that soccer and fame could not compensate for. The deep emotion in these years was a mixture of pride and emptiness, between satisfaction for having lived fully for his passion and regrets about things that could not be returned. Roberto knew that even though he had dedicated his entire youth to building a glorious career, there were still things unfinished in his personal life. Relationships that were not complete, moments of love that had been missed, and opportunities to bond with loved ones that had passed by. But it was precisely in that emptiness that he learned to cherish every present moment, every smile, every laugh of his children, and the sincere affections that life still gave, even if they were few and imperfect. Roberto Carlos looked back at himself and realized that every title, every goal, every bit of fame was never what made a person's value. What was truly important was the way he lived, the way he loved, the way he endured pressure and overcame adversity. The emptiness in his family, the mistakes, and the losses did not make him weak. On the contrary, they trained him with the ability to self-reflect, the ability to endure, and a deep empathy for those who had once been forgotten, underestimated, or lived in loneliness just as he had experienced. Roberto Carlos had dedicated his entire life to soccer, to his career, to the historic moments that the whole world looked at and admired. But what he saw as more important was learning how to face the empty spaces, the loneliness, and the personal failures. Those empty spaces were not failures, but evidence of the challenging path he had walked, proof of the strength, will, and ability to rise above of a person who had once been abandoned, misunderstood, and had to fight alone to exist and to leave his mark in history. Even though he could not fill all the empty spaces in life, Roberto Carlos still continued to live with pride in what he had achieved and humility before what was not yet complete. He knew that career, titles, and fame were not everything. What made the legend was the ability to live, the ability to love, and the ability to inspire, even when facing deep losses and tragedies. Roberto learned to see pain not only as part of the past, but also as a source of strength to move forward, to maintain his extraordinary spirit, and to become a role model of will and resilience for the next generation. In the silence, Roberto Carlos remained a living legend, a symbol of speed, power, and an unconquerable spirit, proof that the empty spaces in life, the mistakes, the unfinished relationships, and even the loneliness could not stop a great man, but instead helped him become a respected legend, a model of spiritual strength and perseverance. Despite all personal tragedies, Roberto Carlos, when looking back on his entire life, was no longer the poor boy in Garza, no longer the young man misunderstood at Inter Milan, and no longer the Real Madrid superstar the world once admired. He was the crystallization of an entire journey full of hardships, challenges, and extraordinary effort. A journey that, from beginning to end, was not only about victories on the pitch, but also about non-stop runs to escape the darkness of childhood, pressure, failure, and the empty spaces in personal life. Every goal, every assist, every title that Roberto achieved was not only a technical or tactical achievement, but proof of determination, endurance, and the ability to turn pain, poverty, and loneliness into motivation for life. From the first days of labor on the cotton fields, the quiet nights on the dirt fields in Garza, to the harsh training sessions at Palmeiras, Roberto had learned to run, not only with his feet, but with his entire will, with his spirit of survival. When he moved to Europe at Inter Milan, the misunderstanding and underestimation almost made him disappear from the world soccer map. But Roberto did not surrender. He continued to train, continued to fight, continued to affirm his own value. And when he arrived at Real Madrid, where brilliant glory and enormous pressure were always present, Roberto Carlos still had to run, still had to be resilient and perfect, because fame and titles could not erase the fear, the insecurity, and the memories of a harsh childhood. Those divine long free kicks, those overlapping runs at a speed that stunned all of Europe, were not only technique, but also the expression of a boy running away from hunger and poverty, a young man running away from misunderstanding and underestimation, and a man running away from pressure and emptiness in life. Every play, every goal was a scream, a declaration. I am still here, I still exist, I am still fighting. But precisely because of that, Roberto Carlos understood that his life was never only about winning. It was about running away from what had once hurt him, running away from memories, running away from loneliness and unavoidable tragedies. The consequences of that running were clearly seen in his personal life. Many unfinished relationships, a fragmented family, not being able to be fully present with his children and loved ones. Even though he loved and cared, Roberto knew that life did not allow him to be fully there, and this very sacrifice, together with all the hours of labor, challenges, and pressure on the pitch, was proof of a man who was indomitable but also full of tragedy. The empty spaces and emotions, the silent loneliness, the failures and personal mistakes were all turned by Roberto into strength to keep moving forward, to keep playing and leaving his mark, even though sometimes he himself clearly felt that he could not fill every empty space or fix every mistake. When age began to take away his speed, power, and endurance, Roberto Carlos still did not stop running with wisdom, with skill, with experience, and with spirit. Every play, every match in the final stage of his career was proof that although the body was no longer perfect, the spirit and will still existed, still remained resilient, still kept breaking through. His career, from Real Madrid to the Brazil national team, from international tournaments to European stages, all showed that a legend is not defined by age or body, but by the ability to stand up, to maintain will, and to continue running, even knowing that limits were getting closer. Looking back, Roberto Carlos's entire journey is the story of a man who never stopped running, running to survive, running to overcome poverty, running to prove his own value, running to face pressure, and running not to be forgotten. Every achievement, title, and goal was the result of those runs, proof of extraordinary spiritual strength and persistent will that his childhood, early challenges, misunderstandings, and tremendous pressure had forged. Roberto Carlos was not only a legendary player, but also a living symbol of the ability to overcome adversity and turn pain into motivation. His life teaches that success does not mean complete happiness. A legend is not defined only by goals or titles, but by the way they face challenges, the way they continue to move forward when the world turns its back and when they themselves face limits. Roberto Carlos, with everything he had gone through, from poverty, loneliness, pressure, and personal tragedy, had become living proof of a spirit that never surrenders, of unwavering will and the ability to turn running away into a source of strength to leave a mark in history. The story of this entire legendary life echoes clearly like a conclusion for the whole journey. Some men win trophies, some men win hearts, but he spent his entire life running from a past that never stopped chasing him. Roberto Carlos had run non-stop, not to escape victory or fame, but to run away from the darkness of his childhood, from harsh pressure, and from the silent loneliness that his entire life had to carry, turning that running journey into a story of will, perseverance, and a legend that lives forever in the hearts of fans. The story of Roberto Carlos is a vivid proof of the power of human will and spirit in the face of adversity, but at the same time, it is also a reminder that even legends have to pay a heavy price for success. When looking back on his journey, from the days of a forgotten childhood in Garza, having to labor hard to survive, going through misunderstanding and underestimation at Inter Milan, to the tremendous pressure at Real Madrid, Roberto Carlos not only ran on the pitch, but also ran away from loneliness, insecurity, and spiritual wounds that had never healed. The 1997 free kick, the symbol of extraordinary speed and power, was not only a historic goal, but a scream from a suppressed childhood, proof that every achievement is tied to silent pain and persistent will. The unfinished relationships, the fragmented family, the children he loved but could not be fully present for, along with the moments of mistakes and failures in his career, all showed that greatness does not come without sacrifice, and that titles or money could never fill the emptiness in the soul. For the American people, Roberto Carlos's story carries a profound message. Success is not measured only by titles, money, or recognition, but by the ability to overcome adversity, to hold firm to will, and to continue living with one's own values. It reminds us that even if society, work, or personal pressure can make a person feel lost or failed, resilience and loyalty to oneself will make the difference. looking at the details of how he had to train his own body from the years of poverty, endure extreme pressure at Inter Milan and Real Madrid, one sees that every difficulty is a lesson to forge will. Every failure is an opportunity to stand up stronger. Roberto Carlos is not only a soccer legend, he is living proof of an indomitable spirit, teaching that anyone, no matter their background, can still overcome adversity, leave a mark in life, and inspire others, as long as they never give up and continue running toward their goal, even if the past keeps chasing them. If the extraordinary but tragic story of Roberto Carlos has touched you, please hit the subscribe button to continue accompanying us in exploring the untold moments in his life. Hit the notification bell right now so you do not miss the next part, where we will continue to dive deep into the challenges, sacrifices, and indomitable will of this soccer legend.